Jayom Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivajgacharya Astotara Sata Shri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Gangamai Yamunmai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tosi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanand. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
Glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're in the third canto, the fifth chapter, and today's verse is number 27. Tato bhavan mahatatvam avyaktat kalachoditat vijnanat matmadehastang vishvam vyanjangs tamo nudaha. Tato bhavan mahatatvam avyaktat kalachoditat vijnanat matmadehastang vishvam vyanjams tamo nudaha. Tato bhavan mahatatvam avyaktat kalachoditat vijnanat matmadehastam vishvam vyanjams tamo nudaha. Please chant.
Tato bhavan mahatatvam. Sorry. Tato bhavan mahatatvam avyaktat kalachoditat vijnanatmatmadehastam Vishwam Vyanjam Stamo Nuda.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Tato bhavan mahatatam abhaktat kala chodita vijnanatma atma dehastam Vishvam bhayanjam stamo nuda. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Tato abhavan mahatattvam avyaktat kala choditat vijnanat matma dehastam vishwam vyanjastamo nudaha.
Tato bhavan mahatattvam avyaktat kala choditat vijnanatmatmadehastam vishwam vyanjam stamonuda.
Hare Krishna. Tato bhavan mahatattvam ayaktat kala koditat vijnanatmatma dehastam vishvam vyanjam stamo nudaha. Hare Krishna.
else? Ataha. Thereafter. Abhavat came into existence. Mahat, supreme. Tattvam, sum total. Avyaktat, from the unmanifested. Kala joditat, by the interaction of time. Vijnana atma, unalloyed goodness. Atma dehastam, situated on the bodily self. Vishram, complete universes. Vyanjan, manifesting. Tama Nudha, the supreme light. Translation. Thereafter, influenced by the interactions of eternal time, the supreme sum total of matter, called the Mahat Tattva, became manifested. And in this Mahat Tattva, the unalloyed goodness, the Supreme Lord, sowed the seeds of universal manifestation out of his own body. Purport by Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In due course of time, the impregnated material energy was manifested first as the total material ingredients. Everything takes its own time to fructify, and therefore the word kala joditat, influenced by time, is used herein. The Mahat Tattva is the total consciousness, because a portion of it is represented in everyone as the intellect. The Mahat Tattva is directly connected with the supreme consciousness of the Supreme Being, but still it appears as matter. The Mahat Tattva, or shadow of pure consciousness, is the germinating place of all creation. It is pure goodness with the slight addition of the material mode of passion, and therefore activity is generated from this point. The verse again. Thereafter, this is Maitreya speaking to Vidura. Thereafter, influenced by the interactions of eternal time, the supreme sum total of matter, called the Mahat Tattva, became manifested. And in this Mahat Tattva, the unalloyed goodness, the Supreme Lord, sowed the seeds of universal manifestation out of his own body. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namne Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravana Pachani Nirdi Shesha Shunya Bali Paschata Deshatari. Om Agnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpa Trubhyas Chakapa Sindhubhya Eva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So in verse 15 of this chapter, Vidura requested Maitreya Muni to describe the essence of all topics, means the topics of the Lord. And so after properly honoring and congratulating Vidura for his connection to the Supreme Lord and for asking appropriate questions, Maitreya Muni then starts describing how the Lord expands himself in order to facilitate his separated parts and parcels' desire to live independently from him, right? Thus creating, maintaining, and again dissolving the material manifestation. This is the topic. This is how we got to where we are. Two pure devotees that want to talk about the supreme topic, topics of the Lord, and then this is where we are here. And of course, the story starts when Maitreya Muni is talking. He mentions that before the manifestation of the material world, that the Supreme Lord that before the manifestation of the material world, which is the external energy, the Supreme Lord existed with his internal energy, right? And it says that he felt the need to facilitate his separated parts and parcels. And so periodically and consistently, he expands the material cosmic manifestation from his own perfect spiritual form, right? His spiritual form is Satchidananda Vigraha. It's not tinged with anything imperfect. But from that perfect body, he expands this external energy, which seems to be imperfect. So you have this Mahat Tattva, which is the supreme sum total of matter, as described in today's verse. And in that, the Lord sows the seeds of universal manifestation out of his own body. And then this description of material creation is going to continue on for several chapters. It's very important. As the first chapter of the second canto is titled, it is the first step in God realization, understanding that everything comes from the Supreme Lord. And he's also within everything, right? So it's a very important topic for us, and it's one worth spending a lot of time and personal application on, right? One may think that when two advanced devotees like Vidura and Maitreya Muni get together and agree that they should be talking about topics of Krishna, that they might focus on Krishna's sweet Vrindavan pastimes, for example, or maybe even mention some of his other more obviously lovable and relishable pastimes. You know, everyone has their own favorites. But we see that this topic of the universal form comes up again and again throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam. We've already covered it a couple of times before this, and we're going to cover it again after this. So it's important. The reason it keeps coming, the topic keeps coming up, is it's because what we need to hear, right? It's what we need to understand before we can properly understand and appreciate Krishna's more intimate pastimes appropriately. Otherwise, if we try to focus on certain pastimes that are more relishable, we may take them the wrong way because we have a conditioned nature and we have a constitutional nature. So our constitutional nature can absolutely understand the way Krishna interacts with all of his devotees. But in our conditioned nature, where we are considering ourselves independent from the Supreme Lord, separate from him, when we hear stories of his most intimate pastimes, we're hearing them through clouded ears, biased ears. And our bias is that we think that we are independent controllers and enjoyers. So when we hear these pastimes, we can take them in the wrong way, or we can take them materially, and we can commit offenses and stifle our devotional process, our progress. So, as mentioned within the last week, going through these verses, the Lord and his internal energy are eternally manifest. That's always there. And his external energy, it cycles through creation, maintenance, and dissolution. And this concept of the Supreme Lord always existing with his internal energy and then existing otherwise in his external energy is the concept is established in the first verses of the Chatur Shlokis from both the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, right? So from Bhagavad Gita 10.8, we have Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo Mata Sarvam Pravartate Iti Matva Bhajante Mam Bhuta Bhava Samandataha. Krishna is telling Arjuna that he is the source of all spiritual and material worlds, and everything emanates from him. The wise who perfectly know this about him engage in his devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. And one might ask, well, what does that look like? What does it look like when the wise who perfectly know this engage in his devotional service and worship him with all their hearts? And to that, Krishna continues, the thoughts of my pure devotees, this is verse 9 of chapter 10, the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me, their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So this is a result of knowing that Krishna alone is the source of all spiritual and material worlds and that everything emanates from him. When one knows that, one engages in this devotional service, and what that looks like is that all of the thoughts of these devotees dwell in Krishna, right? Krishna is the center of all the thoughts of the devotees, right? No more self-centric thinking. What am I getting out of this? Or how is this thing going to serve my needs? No, no, no. Everything that a pure devotee encounters, the devotee sees it in context of Krishna being in the center and it being utilized properly to serve Krishna in the ways that are advised in the Shastras, instructed by the gurus, and shown by example from the sadhus. So not only are their thoughts dwelling always in Krishna, but their lives are fully devoted to his service. So not just in thought, but in their actions. They're making sure that understanding that everything is meant for Krishna's pleasure, that they're engaging it properly, again, according to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, in the pleasure of the Lord's service. And then as a result, Bhagavad Gita 10:9 continues, they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So their words are also constantly engaged in Krishna Katha. Right. And then the first verse of the Chaturshloki of Bhagavatam, Aham eva samayivagre, nanyadyat sat asat param, paschad aham yat etachcha, yo vaishyetas sosmyaham, yo vaishishyeta somsyaham. All right. So Krishna is telling Lord Brahma, Brahma, it is I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself, nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, the Personality of Godhead, and after annihilation, what remains will also be I, the Personality of Godhead. So this concept, not only is it important and it keeps coming up, it's also the very first instruction of it's the first thing that we have to understand before we can know Krishna, right? So both Chaturshloki start with this concept. We have to understand that everything is coming from Krishna. We have to understand the difference between the spiritual world and the material world. We have to understand the relationship between we, the Tatashta Shakti, and the Supreme Lord and the material world, so that we can begin to act accordingly, right? So that our thoughts will constantly be able to dwell in the Supreme Lord, that our activities will always be engaged in the Supreme Lord, and our satisfaction and bliss will be coming from enlightening one another and conversing about the Supreme Lord, right? It'll be spontaneously the thing that we will want to talk about because it makes us happy, right? Satisfaction and bliss will be there. No other topics will make us happy. No other activities will make us happy. And no other thoughts will make us happy. When we get to this understanding, then and only then can we actually relish the sweeter pastimes of the Supreme Lord. Until then, it's very important for us to understand how the Supreme Lord is actually present in all of the things that we are currently using to try to forget him, right? And this is why this topic of the universal form, the cosmic manifestation, the expansion of the Lord's personal body to facilitate the rebellious jivas who misuse their free will. This is why this topic is extremely important, and it's always discussed first when senior devotees are getting together and talking about Krishna. This is always established. Even at the beginnings of, there are various prayers also in Srimad Bhagavatam. And we see that most of them start out like this. They end up very sweet, but they start out acknowledging that the Supreme Lord, he's the source of everything, he's within everything, all that. So this is a very important thing for us to understand. So again, we may think, or it may be our intuition that when pure devotees get together, they skip to the juice, the good stuff, right? And that's our tendency because, our nature, our constitutional nature is to enjoy bliss, right? Our conditioned nature is also to enjoy bliss, but we currently have the misconception that we are the center of that bliss instead of we are servants to the bliss who also get to experience, but it can only be experienced when it's properly engaged in the central figure of Krishna, right? So this concept, again, very important. It's the beginning of both Chatushlokis, and the topic comes up again and again, right? So this chapter, the one that we're on now, 5th chapter of the 3rd canto, and the next 6 chapters after that will elaborate on this process of creation before we move on to talks about the Lord's incarnation of Varahadev, etc. And in the context of that is during the creation, the Lord understood that where the earth was meant to be, he wasn't there. So because of that, he took this form of Varahadev to lift her back up and situate her in her rightful place. So it's still in the context of creation. So again, these are very important topics. So there's 7 chapters this time that are discussing the universal form, right? Before we move on to these other topics. And again, this topic was already discussed in Srimad Bhagavatam multiple times, and it will be discussed again at great length. The second half of the 5th canto is all about this, again, the cosmic manifestation. So this topic is very important for us. So the reason it's important for us to understand, appreciate, and apply this knowledge about the Lord's universal form is that if we fail to understand this aspect of Krishna, then we, rebellious living entities who have misused our free will and attempt to enjoy independently from Krishna, will not be able to actually understand the more personal aspects of Krishna, as I mentioned before. So we may really want to understand Krishna, at least to some extent. We may even pray fervently to have the capacity to understand Krishna. But unless and until we're able to appreciate what he has done for us by personally expanding his body to facilitate our exploitation and betrayal of him, while patiently waiting for us to properly understand his unconditional loving nature and reawaken our dormant relationship with him, until we understand and appreciate that, then how can we expect to appreciate something that isn't even within our reach, right? It's like a child who he wants to learn advanced mathematics because he wants to, solve some of the world's problems. If he doesn't know how to add and subtract yet, then it's not worth focusing on. You have to understand the preliminary steps before you can understand the more advanced, right? Because in the more advanced, these preliminary ones are included. Krishna is there. So here's something that it's worth pointing out over and over. And I've done this before, and I'll certainly do it again. Many people consider that the universal form of Krishna, and that we tend to use Shastra to justify this, right? We say, okay, when Lord Krishna showed Arjuna his universal form, he was scared. He didn't want to see it. It was ruining his relationship, right? It was ruining the rasa. And so he asked him, okay, now please go back to your original form, right? Mother Yashoda, same thing. Lord Balaram told Mother Yashoda that Krishna was eating dirt, he was eating earth. She said, let me see. And she opened his mouth to see if there was any earth. And certainly there was the earth and all of the entire cosmic manifestation. all there within his mouth. And she got to see everything happening, all time, all space. And again, it was very disturbing for her, because is this my little boy, or is this the Supreme Lord, the source of everything? Because those two relationships are conflicting, right? And so the conclusion that Arjuna and Mother Yashoda had is that understanding this aspect of Krishna actually spoils the relationship, right? And therefore, they are covered by Maya, but not Mahamaya like us, but by Yoga Maya, right? So that the relationship can be properly enjoyed without any obstructions, obstacles. So knowing this, knowing that Arjuna and Mother Yashoda didn't very much appreciate understanding this aspect of Krishna, we aspiring devotees also think, yeah, we also don't really appreciate that aspect of Krishna, and we'd rather hear about his sweeter pastimes, right? So we imagine somehow that it's also spoiling our relationship with Krishna. But the issue is, what's actually spoiling our relationship with Krishna is our tendency to think that we are independent from him, right? And that's why we're in the material world. So in order to actually reawaken this dormant relationship with Krishna, this pure relationship, and understand these sweet pastimes, we first have to understand from our current condition context how we are able to see Krishna in everything. He expanded his own body to give us all of the things that we are currently using to forget him. And if we're able to see them properly as they are, actually as Krishna's expanded body, and instead of using them for our own pleasure, our own comfort, our own entertainment, our own whim, then we start using them as they're intended to be used in Krishna's service. Then all of these things that are currently the cause of our bondage will become instruments of our liberation, right? And so there's another verse that I quote often, but I haven't quoted it in a while. This is Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 5th chapter, text 34. And it says, thus, when all a man's activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, those very activities which caused his perpetual bondage become the destroyer of the tree of work, right? So the things that are currently holding us back can be the things that lift us up in our devotional service. And the thing that we have to understand about it is what we're appreciating materially in an object or a concept or a relationship or anything. The thing that we're actually appreciating is Krishna's potency, which is in that thing, no matter what it is. And currently, we're appreciating it because of the way that it makes us feel, or something that it provides for us. So understanding that it's a quality that's attractive is not a problem. Appreciating that quality is also not a problem, but appreciating it only in context to how it serves us, that is where the problem lies. So it's our consciousness. So instead of a self-centric consciousness, we have to develop or uncover our Krishna conscious view, right? And so when we're able to dedicate all of these activities, all the things that we're doing on a daily basis in the service of the Lord successfully, the very activities which previously caused our perpetual bondage become the destroyer of the tree of work. So in today's purport, there are a few things that I wanted to point out. Is that Srila Prabhupada points out that the Mahat Tattva is the total consciousness, because a portion of it is represented in everyone as the intellect, right? So we all have this. We don't all use our intellect very much. But intellect means, so when Krishna says that he is the strength of the strong and the wisdom of the wise, etc., any opulence that we possess, it's coming from him, right? So Krishna is the intelligence of the intelligent person, right? So everyone has this intellect, this capacity to understand, and that's coming from him, right? And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, it's 2 sentences later, it says the Mahat Tattva, or shadow of pure consciousness, is the germinating place of all creation, right? So the Mahat Tattva in the spiritual world, the internal energy of Krishna, that's where the substance is, right? Where reality is, that's actuality, substance, it's substantial. The Mahat Tattva is the shadow of that. So you have the substance and then you have the shadow. And then when it mixes with a little bit of passion, motive passion, then activity is generated, right? So this is what's being described in today's verse and purport. Then, so until we're able to fit this description of engaging, what is it? Until all of our activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, as mentioned again in Bhagavad Gita 10.8 and 10.9, it shows what it means when we're actually engaging properly. Our thoughts are constantly dedicated, our actions and our words, and that's how we're actually deriving our satisfaction and bliss. So the thoughts, the actions, the words. When we're actually able to do that, then these things that have previously caused us perpetual bondage, endless bondage, life after life, become the destroyer of the tree of work. And that's as simple as that. So until we reach this point, then we are naturally, and when I say naturally, I mean conditioned naturally, not constitutionally naturally. Our conditioned nature is forcing us to continue to exploit material nature for sense gratification. And while we're doing that, because we're also aspiring devotees, we appreciate and understand that there is a God and we want to return to him. But until we're actually utilizing all of the things that we encounter successfully in his service, we are exploiting material nature for our own sense gratification. We're in the center. And we then wonder why our progression of self-realization seems to be stalled out, right? Because we're practicing both simultaneously, sense gratification and self-realization. We tend to think that all of our activities are engaged in the Lord's service because we follow certain rules and regulations that are meant to help purify the consciousness. But if the consciousness isn't actually being purified because we're misunderstanding or misapplying the rules, the regulations, the philosophy, then we're continuing to exploit material nature, seeing ourselves as the center instead of seeing Krishna as the center, right? So if we can understand that the Supreme Lord is within everything, then we have to act accordingly, right? If we truly understand how Krishna is present within everything, including our own hearts, then we wouldn't interact with the things that we interact with in the ways that we are currently interacting with them, right? We're not seeing them as Krishna's expansion and using them accordingly. We're seeing them as convenient things that make my life easier, right? Not everything, some things, but we have to be aware of that. And so the things where we're not making that actual connection to Krishna, we have to very much learn from these sections to see why these things are attracted to us, right? Otherwise, we may try to renounce things superficially, right? We may try to give things up externally because I know I'm only doing this for my sense gratification. I better just drop it. I better let it go, give it away, burn it, whatever. But if we're still focusing on it in our minds, we're still very much attached to it, right? The way that we are to properly become detached is to use it in the right way, because everything, since Krishna is present in everything, can be used properly in Krishna's service, right? So we have to stop using it in our own context and start using it in Krishna's context. So in these upcoming weeks and months, as there's several chapters, as we're going through this section, we have a very valuable opportunity to gradually understand how to transform our material attachments into instruments of our liberation from material bondage. And then more importantly, because our goal isn't to become liberated from material bondage, our goal is to reawaken our dormant love of Krishna, right? And start acting appropriately in that relationship. And this is the way that that happens. The liberation part is just a concomitant factor. It comes along with it. Because when we're able to act according to our constitutional nature, when we're no longer misusing our free will, when we're no longer identifying with the false ego, but identifying with the real ego that I am servant of Krishna, when our thoughts are constantly dwelling in Krishna, when we're always enlightening one another and conversing about him, when our activities are completely dedicated to his service, right? Then that relationship is reawakened, right? And that's the actual goal. So we have to understand who we are and where we are, what our relationship is to the Supreme Lord, how everything that we are in contact with is nothing but a transformation of the Supreme Lord, and how our appreciation of these various things that we are appreciating, our appreciation for these things have to be redirected from enjoying them for our own personal benefit to enjoying how they personally benefit Lord Krishna, and how we can take our part in making sure that these things are engaged properly in Krishna's service. This is the process. So these sections are very important. So I encourage all of you. I see that there are many people online today, and that's amazing. I love that. I love that we're continuing through this. But this is a very valuable opportunity when we're going through this section. And it can be difficult because every once in a while we just want to hear about these sweet pastimes of Krishna, right? But it's very important for us, especially at our stage of consciousness, of awakening, that we understand this aspect of Krishna so that we can further understand those sweeter aspects. So I will stop here, see if there are any questions or comments, further discussion.
Hey, Krishna Prabhu, this is Bernadette
Right.
Troy. Thank you so much for such a great class and a good reminder of, kind of that we have to remember where we're at, and that we are, myself, I'll speak for only, that we're mixed, we're navigating the material and energy. Sorry, I'm out for a walk, so I'm a little out of breath, but we're navigating those material energies as much as we're trying to navigate our spiritual life. And, so I guess my question is, how does one who is trying hard to just survive and make a living, and it's like, and I've gone through this personally, if we sit back too much and just like, okay, I'm going to just do lots of service and do japa and all these things, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, I can't put food on the table. So it's like, there's a fine line. So sometimes we have to manipulate and deal with the material world and material energies just for survival.
Yes. So the way we have to understand it is that it's not that we stop doing these things, it's that we do them in the proper consciousness, right? We're not going to stop eating, but we're going to make sure that everything we're eating is offered to Krishna. And that looks different for different people, right? At first, it just means that whatever you were going to eat anyway, you're saying a little prayer and asking, essentially, you're just asking Krishna to take the sin away from it, right? Let's be honest. That's what, when we start, that's what we're doing. And then gradually, hopefully, we start thinking that, maybe we should offer something that's a little nicer for Krishna, right? It's not for us, it's for Krishna. And so we can do better, right? Because he's more important than we are, right? When we have guests over that we like, when our close friends or family come over, we know what their favorite dishes are. We go out of our way to get these ingredients, and we should be doing that for Krishna. So, but more importantly than getting the, better ingredients like that, is having a better consciousness, right? That this is for Krishna. I'm actually cooking this for Krishna, and he's actually going to eat it, right? He doesn't need to eat anything, but he, let's say he feeds on love, right? He appreciates the love of his devotees. So the more we can cultivate that, the better. So it doesn't mean we stop, putting food on the table. It just means we start putting food on the table, knowing that everything we're doing to facilitate being able to put food on the table, and the food on the table, and the process of nourishment, and all of that energy, it's all coming from him. And just understanding, not just in theory, understanding that all of this is coming from him, and we're just doing our little part to engage in the service, but to actually redirect that consciousness. And so, as you mentioned, there are times when we sort of do this. It's like the Bog Tyag thing. We want to get very serious about spiritual life, and then we apply our misunderstanding of spiritual life. And then when we see that, okay, now I've been neglecting some of my personal duties too much, then we go the opposite direction, and then we just focus on that, and we kind of try to put our spirituality on the back burner. But what we need to understand is that we have to do both of them simultaneously, right? We are in this material world. We have relationships. They are temporary, but they are certainly important. So we have to maintain those insofar as much as they are aiding our advancement in Krishna consciousness, right? And so the idea of family life is that the family cooperates to become more attached to Krishna and less attached to material nature, right? That's what any ashram is doing. The brahmachari ashram is doing the same thing. Vanaprastha sannyasa is doing the same thing, right? So those aspects are there. Acharya, if we ever hand up, did you want to add to this, or is it a new?
No, I have a separate question. Please finish.
Okay, yeah, I'm pretty much finished. I tend to just keep ranting until I see someone else asking something.
That was perfect. Thank you, Prabhu.
That was okay? Okay. So she's satisfied with that one, or at least she says she is. Go ahead, Acharya Prabhu.
Okay, thank you. I have no question. I just wanted to really thank you that especially your analysis of understanding Krishna's power, especially his creation, and how that relates to understanding his sweetness and his pastimes. I thought that analysis was really masterfully done and a really important point. And I just wanted to say I thought you did a great job with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're very kind. I had the privilege of so I work with a couple schools here in Mayapur to develop curriculum on Shastric study, specifically Bhagavatam, and then later Chaitanya Charitamrita. And for both schools that I was working for, my first assignment for the curriculum was to do the second half of the fifth canto, because nobody else wanted to do it. And I was very nervous about it, because most people don't understand the second half of the fifth canto. And now, having gone through it and making study guides for it, I realized that these descriptions are actually quite sweet, if you think about it. From our point of view, the universal form is a godless display of opulence, right? And it's scary, it's frightening. All of these points are valid. But if we look at the universal form from Krishna's point of view, it's actually quite sweet, because in the spiritual world, everything naturally revolves around Krishna in its natural state, and everything is in harmony, everything is perfect. But this perfection cannot be properly relished unless there is a choice or an option to not be working in that way, right? So there has to be a desire, a choice, a need to do this. Otherwise, it's just a machine, right? When gears are moving properly, it's nice because you're getting the right result, but there's nothing relishable in that. I mean, we may relish the fact that the machine's working and it's giving us some sort of output, but the machine itself, it's not relishing anything. So the spiritual world is not like that. There has to be this option to not do that, right? And thus free will exists, right? And so we, Tatastha Shakti, who misused our free will to try our hand at being independent from him, essentially we wanted to enjoy separately from the Lord, but there's no such thing as separately from the Lord. The Lord, we are part and parcel of him, so we exist in him. And so the fact that in that circumstance, when we decided to misuse our free will and enjoy separately from him, Krishna had a couple options. One is that, okay, they want to be separate from me, so separate from me means not existing. That's one option. And he could have very easily done that because there are infinite amounts of spirit souls. So wouldn't even really be missing anything in that sense when you compare infinities, right? It's a small set of infinity compared to the larger set of infinity. One might even say it's negligible. But Krishna has unconditional love for us. Our love isn't currently unconditional, but his is. And so instead of blinking us out of existence, he expanded his own form to facilitate our illusion that we are independent from him. And as I mentioned earlier in the class, we're exploiting all of his different expansions of his body in order to forget him. And he's observing the whole thing within our hearts, within every atom. And because of that unconditional love, he's allowing us to do that until we awaken our original consciousness by encountering a spiritual master and inquiring from him properly, right? By trying to actually, find out what our true nature is. And so from Krishna's point of view, that's super sweet. The fact that he would do that he would expand his own body from his, he doesn't have to do anything, and he's already living in a perfect place, but he expanded his body to facilitate the ones that chose not to love him, right? And that made that conscious choice. And he continues to do that, and over and over and over again, he continues to do it. Most people wouldn't do that. That would be heartbreaking if someone we loved wanted to leave us, but we still had to fully maintain them, right? It'd be heartbreaking to see that. So from his point of view, it's quite sweet. And so going through that section, it's quite clear that that's what the descriptions of the universal form are all about. Understanding that unconditional love of Krishna and what he's willing to go through in order to facilitate our really, really bad idea, our concepts, our consciousness, our polluted consciousness. And so he continues to do that. So it's super sweet, actually. And when we can see that, then we stop seeing the material world as something that's serving me, and we start seeing it gradually as how it's actually meant to be used. So it took a long time to actually understand that, and it was through studying these sections, right? So, and all of us need to do that in order to sort of appreciate that. So thank you for saying that. That was very nice of you. But it's kind of a hard-learned lesson, but one worth learning that we all need to.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you for your nice class. And I have one question. You said that there is a shadow on Mahat Tattva. What is the meaning of shadow? And is it in the Brahm Jyoti?
So the Mahat Tattva is the shadow of the actual substance. The substance is the internal potency of the Supreme Lord. It's substantial. The Mahat Tattva is described in this purport as the shadow of that. So it means it looks just the same, like a reflection looks the same as the real thing, but it doesn't function like the real thing anymore because it's no longer in the real context, it's in the reflective or shadow. So everything in the material world is actually a shadow, which means we see reflections of the same things that are going on in the spiritual world, and we appreciate them, but we're appreciating them in our own context, thinking that we're enjoying them instead of seeing how they're meant to be enjoyed by Krishna, right? Once we're able to see things in the way that Bhagavad Gita 10.8 and 10.9 are describing, then we're actually dealing with the substance instead of the shadow. So that's what shadow means. It's like a reflection. It's a representation of the actual thing, but not the actual thing. It's not substantial. Does that Makes sense.
So is it in Brahma Jyoti? Where is it located?
Where is it located?
I don't know anything about it.
Well, let's see. Yeah, once a spirit soul frees himself from the material world and all of the coverings, then there is the Brahma Jyoti. I couldn't say for sure. I could guess, but I'd have to look that up. Maybe Acharya Prabhu knows.
I think in one of the class we learned that it is in Brahma Jyoti, but I was not able to understand the meaning of shadow.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And then as soon as that element of motive passion is added, then obviously you're no longer dealing with the internal. So you wouldn't even be dealing with the Brahma Jyoti anymore. But in its unmanifested state, maybe. I can't say for sure though. It would make some sense, but I can't say with authority if that's right or not. I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Okay. It's a very difficult subject for me to. I get confused how we hear about it again and again. But
So the
what do I do?
important thing, right? So when we get confused about things like that, the important thing isn't trying to understand where it is. It's trying to understand what it means in relation to us. So the fact that we're here in the material world means that we misused our free will. Here we are. And that the way back to the spiritual world is to purify our consciousness by understanding that Krishna is actually the center of everything and using it accordingly, as advised in the Shastras and the instructions of the Guru and the examples of the sadhus. And once we're able to do that, it doesn't matter where these other things are situated. Like, so of all the Vedas, Krishna is to be known. So if we're focusing on that, none of the other things matter. We see when Gopakumar was on his journey back to the spiritual world, and he traveled through all of these places. Sure, you can say while he's traveling through, you can take note of what is where, and that's a thing that we can observe. But the most important thing is while going through all of these things, he knew that he wasn't in his eternal position until he was actually in Braj, right? While in Vaikuntha, sure, he was able to have some interaction with Lord Vishnu that was in his mood, but the overall mood there, it wasn't his mood, right? And so he had to continue on. So where it's situated, I can't exactly say. It could make sense that it's in the Brahma Jyoti, but it could also make sense that it's just next to the Brahma Jyoti. Acharya Prabhu, do you have an answer to that?
I have a couple of things to say. Is the question, where is the Mahatattva situated?
Yes. She's asking
Okay.
if it's the Brahma Jyoti.
Yeah. Well, I can't say authoritatively, but it's within the Brahma Jyoti in the sense that everything is within the Brahma Jyoti, which is all pervading as Krishna's effulgence. But more specifically, it's situated within the seed universes that are coming out of Mahavishnu's body. So within those seeds is the Mahatattva, and then the Mahatattva expands into all of the gross material elements from that. So it's within those individual seed universes. That's a short answer. And as a teaser, on Thursday, we'll be discussing that a little more.
Oh, good. Good.
But that's the short
Okay,
answer, is that the Mahatattva is within those universes that are coming out of the pores and the breathing of Mahavishnu's body.
Sure.
I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah.
that's a quick answer.
Yeah.
Good. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhuji, both.
Sure.
Hare Krishna.
All right, Krishna. Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
All right, Krishna.
As you had said, this topic is very difficult to understand, and for me, it has been really, really tough. And I'm not trying to avoid it, but it's because it is difficult to understand it. I rush through it. even organizing the verses on the schedule has been difficult for me. Parikshit Prabhu helps me and makes sure that, they're organized properly on the schedule. But what can I use to test or, check on myself to see if I am, when you said everything should be centered on Krishna, I should understand that Krishna is in control of everything. I don't say otherwise. I am, when you say that, I'm completely in agreement with it. I parrot
Sure.
that also. But what does it actually mean to understand that?
Yeah. So yeah, it means what does it look like? So we say that, of course, we accept that Krishna is the center, but we have to observe when we're acting on certain things. We have to understand, is our intention actually to use this specifically and exclusively in Krishna's service? Or are we choosing the things that we're doing based on our material attachments, right? And so what we see is that there's a mix, right? Because we appreciate Krishna, but we're not necessarily actually conscious of him, right? We're still the center, and we're sort of playing within the rules, which is a good first step. But generally, the way I advise aspiring devotees is to, on a daily basis, we can think, okay, what's something that I'll always do every day without fail. Nobody has to remind me. No one has to, what things am I doing, right? And we look at the things. First, we start with the biggest thing. The thing, no fail, without, no exceptions. I'm doing this. So we start with that, the thing that we're really, always doing. We're spontaneously attracted to doing whatever it is, and then we have to identify, okay, am I doing this fully for Krishna, or am I appreciating something about it that's serving me in my conditioned nature, my state, right? And what we'll find is, yes, it is. I'm appreciating that Krishna is in it, but it's mostly for me. So if it got taken away, I would be upset, right? Whereas if it's all for Krishna, if it's taken away, it's okay because I could serve Krishna in another way, right? And so what we need to do in those situations, first we identify it, and then gradually through these descriptions, through discussions with other sadhus, through the instructions of the guru, we have to understand how to properly engage whatever that is in Krishna's service, right? So as I mentioned in the class, that being attracted to something is not a problem. Appreciating that attraction is also not a problem, but appreciating it only with myself as the context of that appreciation, that's where the problem lies. It's a problem of consciousness, right? If I'm only or mostly seeing how this thing serves me and that's why I'm doing it, then we have to learn how to properly use it. So we don't want to give it up falsely and still be attached to it, but we need to know how it's actually meant to be engaged in Krishna service, right? And that happens through Guru Sadhu and Shastra. So essentially we pick our biggest thing. Like a story that I've told many times is a while back, while I was an aspiring devotee for 10 years or more at that point. And I was also a race car driver because it was just something that I spontaneously became attracted to. I used to show, I had a car that I used to show. I used to take it to meets where people would look at it and they would judge it. And some of the shows happened at racetracks, so you could show your car and then you could also race it. And so I had a friend who was racing while I was showing. And he asked me if I wanted to, take his car for 1 or 2 passes. And I did, and I became addicted to it. It was a spontaneous attraction. It was something that I just liked. And so that was the last time I showed my car, and I just started racing, right? And I appreciated it, and I was using it in the context of Krishna consciousness, because I was using it as and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. It's a really long story, but I was using it as an instrument to help focus my japa, because it was drag racing. In drag racing, every little tiny thing that seems insignificant that you do makes a huge difference in the final result. So it was helping me become more attentive in my chanting, because sometimes our mind wanders and we think it's no big deal, whatever, I'm still chanting. That's the most important part. But no, even these small things, even these small diversions are going to make a big difference in the end. Offenses, same with that. Yeah, I understand it's not ideal to commit these offenses, but I feel justified in my offense, and I don't really think it is an offense because this particular person isn't really technically a devotee, so I'm not really blaspheming. We try to justify like that, but it's a huge deal, right? And so I was using that medium to focus on an aspect of increasing my appreciation and effectiveness of japa, right? So that was one thing that I was able to engage in. The other thing is I was very good at it because Krishna, is the ability in man. So anything that we're able to do, it's because of Krishna. So I would always win. There's only one race that I lost, and when I would win, you would actually win money. It wasn't really gambling because I was racing anyway. You pay an entry fee, kind of like when you go bowling, you pay to bowl, right? So I was doing it anyway. I wasn't trying to get money back, but I did win. And so I would use that money in Christian service. Either I donate it to my guru or to the temple, etc. And then the third way I engaged in Krishna service was since I always won, people always wanted to know what my secret was. And so if they asked my friends, they would say, oh, that's because he's racing for Vishnu. And if they asked me, I would say that's because I'm racing for Krishna, right? So then using that to, it's not really that big of a preaching thing, but a little bit. You're telling people that the reason that this is happening is because of Krishna. Sort of preaching. You wouldn't really call it the most direct preaching, but it's there. So these things, I was doing it because I was attracted to it, and I was trying to engage it to the best of my ability to help it, or to use it to help bring my japa to a more attentive state, to use the fruits of that action in Krishna service, and to use it as a subtle preaching opportunity. But really, I was just attracted to doing that. And that's what it was. It was more about me, but I was appreciating Krishna, and I was trying to engage it. And that is the process. That's what we do. But eventually we have to use it exclusively in Krishna service, right? So then when I started studying Bhagavatam, I understood that I had a deeper material attachment to that than I was actually engaging it spiritually. But I had other spiritual attachments that I could cultivate, that I could leave that behind. It was no longer something I felt that I needed, right? After taking instructions from Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is the process. Acharya Prabhu, thank you for that. Racing for Krishna. So yeah, this is our process. First, we do whatever we're doing the best we can for Krishna, try to engage it in whatever way possible. And a lot of times that may seem like mental justifications of our attachment, but no, actually, sometimes it is. You're really trying to give up your attachment. But you have to keep moving in that direction of giving up that attachment. And giving up that attachment just means actually using it in Krishna service. When we can actually use something in Krishna service, we're no longer attached to it. That means we can actually give it up without thinking about it ever again, because we picked up something else, or we can continue to do it, but not being attached to it. That's the beauty of it, right? The activity doesn't have to change, but it certainly can if we can pick up something that's more favorable to our devotional service without having that mental attachment to the external thing that we just gave up. And so this is our process. So if we do this as often as possible, observe in our life how we are doing certain things and what is our actual motivating factor. Would we still be doing this if we lost complete faith in Krishna? Is this something we would still be doing, or is this something we're exclusively doing for Krishna? So we have to identify that, and it can be a slow process, or it can be a a longer process. But yeah, that is our method. It's New Year's Eve here in Mayapur, so there's fireworks now. Anything else?
We just have to learn to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah. And we do that by the more we avoid actually learning from Shastra, the more likely we are to not be honest with ourselves, because we have a very specific mixture of wanting to enjoy material nature and wanting to be engaged in Krishna service, right? And until that matures and we become more interested in pleasing Krishna than pleasing our senses, then we won't actually have an attraction for Shastra. And Shastra is in three forms: Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, because Guru is only instructing based on Shastra, and the Sadhu's examples are what they've learned in Shastra, right? So somehow there has to be an appreciation of Shastra, and once we get that appreciation, then these attachments, we're more honest with ourselves, right? It's no longer the mind saying, oh no, you're engaging fine in Krishna service, right? You're telling people you're racing for Krishna, you're giving them the fruits, but no, you're good, you're fine. You don't have to do anything else. This is already the perfection of yoga, right? The mind will tell us that. But the more we actually understand, the more we realize, oh, I can be doing way better. I can be doing much more direct service, right? And the key is when we actually become detached, we see that it's no longer a thing that we need to do. We can do it if it's still in service of Krishna, but we no longer need to do it. But yeah, honesty with ourselves is a very important thing. But these sections will help us become honest with ourselves. So for me, what made me honest with myself was Bhishma Dev, and I've told this story several times. Bhishma Dev was on his bed of arrows, and Yudhishthira, who was inconsolable, even Lord Krishna himself couldn't console him, couldn't dispel his despair for wiping out all of these respectable personalities just so he could maintain, just so he could take on the throne, the empire. Nobody could make him feel better about the situation. And so he went to Bhishma Dev, and Bhishma Dev, he's talking about Daivi Varnashram, understanding what your nature is and engaging it properly according to the laws that Krishna gives in the Vedas. So he's talking Krishna consciousness, right? Daivi Varnashram, how to figure out what your nature is, properly use it. And this is what he's preaching. And in the very next moment, he says, because he understood now it's a suitable time to leave his body, he said, now let my thinking, feeling, and willing, which has so long been engaged in different occupational duties and activities, now be completely focused on Krishna. And that was a big wake-up call for me. Me thinking that my loose connection to Krishna was actual engagement, but Bhishma Dev, who was actually so connected to Krishna, was actually even giving up that final thing, which Varnashram, by the way, eventually you give it up because it's material, right? We use it to get to Krishna consciousness, and then once you're Krishna conscious, there's no more material nature to engage. It's gone. It's purified, right? So there's still what looks like Varnashram in the spiritual world, but it's not that same process. So that made me be much more honest with myself, right? Seeing the honesty of these pure devotees, and each devotee that we hear these pastimes of in Srimad Bhagavatam, they all have very, very important lessons that are applicable to us. So we just have to hear what they're saying and learn from them, and that's what we do. But this particular subject matter, the universal form, that's where most of us really need to start. It's the first step in God realization. When we find that we've been engaging, at least externally or in the details of the process of spirituality, but we don't seem to be making very much actual internal spiritual advancement, we have to understand that we're not doing it right. We may be following, pardon me, the details strictly. We may even think we're following the details even stricter than they're given, right? Because sometimes you have these things are advised, and then it says, well, it's better to do it like this. So we may even be the most strict. But as we saw from the Yagnik Brahmanas, even with all that training, with all the sacrifices, austerities, all of the things that they performed, since it didn't actually lead to them understanding Krishna and serving him, they said to hell with it all, right? Damn it all of it, because it didn't awaken that love. It doesn't mean that these things aren't valuable. It means that they weren't valuable for them because they didn't awaken that. So everything we do should be awakening that. And sure, it's going to start out with what we're currently attached to. That should be awakening our love of Godhead. Then we start giving up the things that we're attached to and actually doing the things that are advised in the Vedas, because they're specifically designed to awaken our love of God. And then we even become detached from the Vedas, because we now have become we then become completely attached to serving Krishna. Our conditioned nature is melted away, so we're no longer dealing with things that deal with the conditioned nature, right? Including Vedas. We're only dealing with that love of God, right? And so so that's the process, and that's how these sections will help get us to that point. Anything else? I always feel like I go off on tangents and I'm not sure where we started, but hopefully that was relevant.
Yes, it was, Prabhu. I think just even understanding how important these sections are, and that I should try harder to understand. They are difficult, and whatever intelligence I have, and but I have to work at it and not give up.
And more importantly than understanding is applying it, right? So it's one thing to understand, okay, yeah, I should be doing this, but it's then to apply it. So when we're chanting Hare Krishna, the Chaito Darpana Marjana, Krishna is giving us clarity. He's showing us this is what you should do, this is what you should stop doing. But then we still have our free will to choose to actually follow that clarity or to ignore it for some time, right? I think it was Marcus Aquinas, something. Dear God, grant me chastity, but not just yet. Right. So this is kind of what we do. We want that clarity, but we don't necessarily want to act on the clarity yet. So when we're actually willing, not just willing to, but when we actually act on the clarity, then the spiritual advancement comes, right? Then more clarity comes, because Krishna sees, oh, okay, I showed him that this is what he should do. That's what he did. So now I'm going to show him what he should do next. Right. That's the process, step by step. But if the clarity comes and we say, oh yeah, but that, I'll do that some other, later. Maybe give me a couple of years. I just need to finish off these very important duties that I have first, right? But we can continue to do our material duties while actually, paying attention to this clarity that Krishna is giving us, and that's the most important aspect of Krishna consciousness.
But I don't see any more hands up.
Okay. I thank you all for joining. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai.
Jai. Panchakalpatarabhya kripasindabhya chapatitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo.
Namo. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.